American welfare.
Oliver Anthony is not experiencing language the same way you and I experience language. Last year, this guy, Oliver Anthony, a small-time independent country singer, put a song online called The Richmond North of Richmond. Song starts off strong. First verse is talking about how tough it is to be a regular working person in America. And then in the second verse, it all goes off the rails. He reveals what he thinks is the problem, which is poor people being lazy. And then sprinkles in a little QAnon for good measure. Anthony wants us to believe that he is mad that the government won't spend money on broke people, but is also very mad when the government spends money on broke people. People rightly dragged Anthony for the incoherence of the position, but that contradiction is not a problem for Oliver Anthony. It went right over his head because he doesn't experience language the same way you and I do. Think about the type of musicians that Oliver Anthony is cosplaying as. Johnny Cash, John Prine, Loretta Lynn, Blaze Foley. Those were people who had unique and clear-eyed perspective about how the world works, and they wrote songs to communicate their values, their ideas, their stances, their beliefs to the rest of us. They used their language to point toward things that were real and happening in the real world. But Oliver Anthony uses language just to express emotional states. The type of musicians that Oliver Anthony idolizes used language as a tool of communicating their own personal substance. But for Anthony, language is just aesthetics. The whole thing escaped Anthony's control pretty quick. Within months of the song's release, the Republican Party establishment had adopted it as one of its anthems. And some of the actual rich men north of Richmond used his YouTube clip as the opener to the first 2024 presidential debate for the Republican Party. Conservative elites were probably over the moon to see somebody young volunteer to carry water for them. And thanks to Anthony, a bunch of dead, debunked talking points about welfare queens got up and zombie walked across the stage and into a news cycle for the first time in 40 years. Posing in the interior of an old-timey pickup truck, as Oliver Anthony assumes old boys must do, he took to social media to try to convince us he was confused about the entire thing. He gave a confused and rambling gibberish kind of reaction, but no explanation, because again, there's nothing he can explain.
I wrote that song about those people, you know? But it was funny kind of seeing the response to it. Like, that song has nothing to do with Joe Biden, you know? That song's written about the people on that stage, and a lot more too, not just them, but definitely them.
Oliver Anthony can insist until he's blue in the face that his song is not a MAGA hymn. In fact, he's such a mindless NPC that he might actually believe that. He thought he could sing a song that was just a pastiche of right-wing talking points and then just declare it not a pastiche of right-wing talking points, because that's how he experiences language. But the rest of the world doesn't experience language that way. So when the dogs all heard the dog whistle, the dogs all came a-running. Which is why it's pretty easy to find clips of his concerts getting interrupted by "Fuck Joe Biden, let's go Brandon" chants.
Fuck Joe Biden! Fuck Joe Biden!
None of this would have happened if he was experiencing language the way you and I experience language. If he had a consistent set of values and beliefs and was just sitting there explaining them, he'd be talking about the same thing the entire time that he was talking, and he wouldn't find himself in these contradictory positions. Yeah, so I've been posting a little bit about this over the last couple of weeks, just examples of these moments where you can catch like fascist and proto-fascist and MAGA and alt-right folks like demonstrating a different cognitive experience of language. And Trump is not an exception. Can you remember like early on in his first presidential campaign, people used to say about Trump, oh, you got to take him seriously, but never take him literally. That's just another way of saying this phrase of like, Trump is experiencing language differently than the rest of us. For Trump, language is not being used to point toward realities or to make arguments about real things that are happening in the real world. The language is just aesthetics. The language is just a way of expressing kind of like these emotional feelings, these emotional states, these emotional intuitions. It's not a way of describing the real world. I mean this 100% seriously. This is not like an ironic statement. Donald Trump is a type of artificial intelligence, right? Or at least like the character that Donald Trump plays on TV. You and I don't know him personally. We're only ever going to interact with the character that he plays. But that character is a type of artificial intelligence because that character uses language and symbols and symbolic language not to point toward realities that are happening in the real world, but to express these like emotional states. For example, invasion at the southern border is not a statement meant to say there's literally an invasion going on at the southern border. It's a statement made to express, I feel panic and anxiety over shifting demographics. I feel panic and anxiety over the idea of we legally don't have complete control over who is here and who isn't. I have this panic and anxiety over the change of like the American identity and American culture. But Trump and MAGA don't have like the emotional intelligence or the metacognition to be able to be aware that that is what's going on. So they are feeling this emotion and they're just opening their mouth and just letting whatever words come out that point to the emotional state. They don't point to a factual belief. When MAGA calls school teachers groomers, they're not trying to point to any systemic, specific instances of teachers engaging in sexual impropriety with students. What they are expressing, whether intentional or not, is I don't feel comfortable with school systems and by extension just general polite society being increasingly more comfortable and having more nuanced language around people who don't fit into sexual and gender norms. But MAGA does not have the spine to reflect on their own behavior. They don't have the intelligence enough to think about their own thinking. So they just kind of open their mouth and what just blurts out is just language, just word salad, groomers, whatever, as a way of trying to get across the way that they feel. I promise you, if you start listening to these alt-right and MAGA type of folks and processing their statements of like objective truth, and I'm just saying it like it is, and these are just the facts, and you start imagining, okay, these are not facts or objective truth, these are emotional sentiments dressed up as facts or objective truths. All of a sudden, it's a lot easier to like understand what they're trying to say. I don't agree with what they're trying to say, right? I am not scared of a changing world because I understand how much the world has changed just in like the period of time that I've been alive. And I understand that history is going to go on for thousands of more years. I am not so tied into the right now that it causes me like generalized anxiety to understand that the world will always be changing. But I do think here we are 10 years fucking on and leftists and liberals still are not understanding the alt-right. Listen to MAGA and listen to the alt-right and understand that for them, facts do care about feelings because facts and feelings are the same thing. There's no distinction in between the two.